Welcome to the show. It is Sandy and Shawn. Santa Clough, the GOAT, will be with us in just a little bit. But, of course, as we start every program here out at Broncos Park, powered by Common Spirit. I'm going to get it by the end of this, Cody. Cody Roark,
it's going to be hard to miss it.
Right. Fortunately, at least there's two signs right in front of my face the whole time, so maybe I'll get that memorized eventually. But here we are out in the second week of Broncos camp. Of course, focus on the quarterbacks as expected. Go away from calling this a competition. In the end, this is about when, not if, Bo Nix takes over the QB1 spot. And now it feels already as if Zach Wilson has kind of fallen out. You and I talked about this before. Zach Wilson was never really in the mix to start. He was always a bit of a flyer. The idea is for the Broncos to find out if he is a long-term backup option for them. And so you can kind of take him out of this. It now becomes about when Bo Nix will start. Would it be a better choice for Jarrett Stidham to start a game or two before putting Nix in or not? We've only been a couple practices in. So anyone who's looking at it saying, Bo Nix didn't look quite as good as Jarrett Stidham yesterday. Okay, in the second padded practice. Take a deep breath and relax. It's not as if Stidham was out here looking like Joe Montana as prime either.
And both of those guys yesterday had passes batted down. I mean, there were 5 passes batted down. Jarrett Stidham had 2 passes batted down at the line of scrimmage by the defensive line. Bo Nix had 1. The thing, though, is like, these two guys are really in a competition for the job, but ultimately all roads are going to lead to Bo because he was drafted in the first round. But I will say this, like, in terms of the offense, the thing that frustrates me about the, media and even just like the fans sometimes is, you watch a practice and all of a sudden it's like, okay, this guy didn't look good. And it's the end of the world. It's like, oh my gosh, like, no, like you got to understand there's a process that has to play out with these guys in particular. We're watching them here, going through the walkthrough as they do every single morning. But the thing is these guys are going through the install period on the offensive side of the ball right now.
And not just the quarterbacks in that regard, too.
No,
everybody is.
It's the defense as well, though it's a little easier for the defense because you have your call. But then each position has different rules per call that you have defensively based on what the formation is offensively. But, ultimately the offense is trying to just get comfortable with their foundation. Like everyone's investing. Like it gets exhausting reading like the scorecard every day because the scorecard, it's only a content conversation. To the coaching staff, that doesn't matter. It's the body of work here. And I think the practices next week will more than likely be more definitive about, okay, hey, we're in game week. We play the Indianapolis Colts next Sunday. So now that means we need to start implementing our base stuff. We need to be ahead further than we were last week. And so you're going to see that. And I think it's going to take through the first preseason game, joint practices, second preseason game. And then I think you're going to see Shawn announce the starter before they play Seattle. That week off that they have in between, like roster cuts, the final preseason game, that's when it'll probably come forth.
Right. And you'll see things change in the snap count and practices. But you're right. When you take a practice, what you're really doing is you're taking a little snapshot. And remember, teams don't stop practicing once the season starts. You know, every single sport, basketball, hockey, baseball, there's still practices. And human beings sometimes have good days and they have bad days. And that's why you don't evaluate it in those small little sample sizes. You look at the larger sample size. And one practice isn't necessarily enough to sort that all out. And I think when you look at, but let's look at the wider view, right? And getting it eventually to Bo Nix. If the idea of this season is to find out that Bo Nix is your starter going forward, which I presume it is.
He is. That's how the team feels.
Right. Well, and that's how the team has to feel. That's how they have to feel. And so if the team feels he is their guy going forward, what's the point of starting Jarrett Stidham in week 1 against the Seattle Seahawks?
Yeah, no, I mean,
why? What do you get out of it? If you believe Bo Nix, if the team believes Bo Nix is the guy, and they've already seen enough to say, yeah, we feel good that for the next couple of years at least that this is our guy, then what's the point of grabbing a player who, by the way, I know we say veteran, he has 4 career starts to Nix's 0 career starts. It's not a massive difference. I just don't really see even the point behind saying that, well, Stidham will start in Seattle because it's, loud in Seattle? Well, doesn't Nix have to learn how to deal with that
Bo's
too?
Played in Seattle against the Huskies, and it's loud there.
Right.
Bo's got the experience. That's, I know the elements and loudness, they're definitely a factor. That's not something that Bo's ever really been concerned about. Bo's played in the SEC. He's played under the bright lights at some of the biggest games against some of the biggest teams when he was at Auburn. And then also what he did at the University of Oregon. You go and you play in hostile territory. Like Bo, if I'm not mistaken, last year, I believe he had 16 touchdowns, 0 interceptions on the road. So he's not necessarily a guy who's fazed by hostile environments. I think he's a guy who's comfortable with his process, his technique, and obviously the chemistry with his teammates, specifically at the college level. Mike McGlinchey told us the other day, Bo's very mature and he feels like he's going to, do a lot of great things for the locker room and for the team this upcoming season. So it's just going to play out. The dog days of training camp, it's long, it's grueling. You're not going to look perfect all the time. You're not going to look great. And look, there's people out here who are counting, stats like, 7 of 9, this and that, how many picks are being thrown.
Right.
None of that stuff
But the
matters.
coaches aren't even really, they're tracking it, but only
that
for the larger,
matter.
wider stuff.
No.
And honestly, it's going to come down to the coaching staff who decides basically what they've seen and what they feel based on how it looks. Because obviously you say, he's only thrown this many and they were complete. That might be a good thing. Maybe it means that one of your corners made a great play and now it counts as a quote unquote incomplete.
I mean,
but
in Buffalo,
doesn't mean it's a bad throw.
First day of pads in Buffalo, I believe Josh Allen had 3 interceptions on his first 4 passing attempts. So it's like, we know what Josh Allen can do. We know what Josh Allen's very good. He's one of the top quarterbacks in the league. It's like, the one thing I don't think fans realize when we're out here at practice, and even when the regular season comes, quarterbacks will throw interceptions in practice too. But you know what? We don't report on it because it doesn't matter.
Right.
None of that stuff is meaningless. As a matter of fact, I'd argue you want to get the mistakes out here in practice. Mm-hmm. That way you're like, all right, hey, this is maybe how the defense will play me if I'm going through this read or on this specific play. If this guy intercepted it, what did I do wrong? How can I maybe counteract it? Is there something I'm giving away, on the tape that maybe people can pick up on? That's the intricacies of practice. And it gets so overlooked because, unfortunately, we're in an era, social media, everything, it's got to be reactionary. It's got to be instant gratification. But these guys are all competing. They're working their tails off. And internally, the Broncos, the coaching staff, I can tell you this, they feel comfortable. They feel confident about the direction that they're heading right now. Practices have gone well. Camp has gone well. And it's just the process, let it play out. And I think that's exactly what this coaching staff's doing. But I think you're going to see more urgency next week as they do get into game prep.
Yeah, the idea, of course, that the announcement of a starter is sort of the next big thing. That's not necessarily the case, Of course. We'll start to see it happen before there ends up being an announcement, obviously, out here on the practice field. And I kind of want to help people understand to move away. I get it. Quarterbacks are fun, new shiny object. Everyone gets excited about what might be next. I do understand it. But as we talked about before, this is not a competition. It is purely a matter of time until Bo Nix is the starting quarterback. Bo Nix was identified prior to the draft by Shawn Payton.
I would say it's
a
competition until he's named the starter.
Yes, of course. And it would be at any position. Yeah. But it's a foregone conclusion that Bo Nix will be named the starter. It's just a matter of when. And basically, I guess let's look at it coming into today. Is there any reason that you look at Bo Nix today and say he's so far behind Jarrett Stidham that between now and the time the regular season starts, he can't make up the gap?
No, not at all. And look, I don't even think there's really a gap between them.
Don't either.
That's the thing that people are trying to say.
Yesterday there was right.
Like
so
where's the gap?
Practice.
What's the gap?
The idea coming out of yesterday's practice was, Jarrett Stidham was so much more comfortable all across, local, national
media. Just
because
he had a completion to little Jordan Humphrey on a dig route for 15 yards, the competition's over. Like that.
Yeah. To me, Nix is so far behind. The comfort level's not there. Let's not get crazy here about Jarrett Stidham. And I'm not trying to run him down, but you're talking about a guy that's been on 3 teams in 4 years, has made 4 career starts. 2 of them were at the tail end of last year, and probably wouldn't have made those except Russell Wilson was persona non grata to Sean Payton by the end of the season. So you're not talking about a guy that's remarkably established, and it's not. It's remarkable to me at how much and how oftentimes this happens. But it's been a while since there's been a first-round draft pick. And there's been a while since there's a first-round draft pick that people knew of. When Paxton Lynch was drafted, all the way back when, people didn't watch a lot of Memphis football games, so they had no judgment. There was no way to avoid Oregon. They were leveling the University of Colorado. They were into the semifinals of the national championship. You couldn't avoid watching Oregon. And so people know who Bo Nix is. Now having him in here, obviously they're excited about it. But then the notion that Jarrett Stidham, because he's somewhat familiar, ends up being either a stopgap starter or something else different. It really is fascinating to me. And that's the seesaw. And I'm glad you see it the same way, because it isn't after every practice that you have to reset the landscape of this team, because that's simply inaccurate. That's a stylistic thing for people who are looking for content and looking for clicks, or looking for whatever to say, all these really important things happen in practice. Okay, That can be true. There can be really important things happening in practice. But every morning to say, but that changes everything, that almost never happens. And it hasn't happened out here once yet.
Yeah, and no, and
With
look,
one exception. Perhaps when Levi Wallace made a statement with his pick, Wallace, when we're talking about guys that are significantly ahead of their other competitors at this position, maybe Wallace made a play. That was important, and it maybe changed the calculus. But very little things have happened out here with only 2 padded practices that change everything for the Denver Broncos. This is part of a normal, regular process. And this second year under Sean Payton, it's much more streamlined.
Yeah, well, and the thing, too, is, the thing that is in Jarrett's favor is that, he has been in this system for over a year now. This is his second year. Of course, there's going to be more comfortability and familiarity with it. He understands what Shawn wants, and from an operational standpoint, he also looked good. And Jarrett looked good, I felt like, in the second and third preseason games last year, because last year when he first came in, first game didn't look so sharp. Second game against San Francisco, he's kind of dishing and diming a little bit. But the thing is, of course, Jarrett's going to be a little bit ahead in terms of understanding the system. Does that mean he's ahead in the competition? No, not necessarily. You look at what Bo has been able to do in terms of his athleticism. Like, if there's times where, like, for example, I'd say yesterday's a great example. Okay, there were opportunities where the passing lane wasn't necessarily there for him. He used his legs. He demonstrated his mobility, and he's fast. Like, he's deceptively fast. I mean, but then again, you go back and you follow him at Oregon. His first season at Oregon, ran for over 500-something yards, had 14 rushing touchdowns.
He still had 234 and 6 last year.
So it's like, the idea that he's, he's a guy who can win off structure, but also you want him to stay in the pocket. I think he's done a really good job of that. But, as you mentioned, it's only 2 days of pads so far registered. They're on the 3rd day of pads here today. It's just going to have to continue to play out. You just need more reps. That's the thing. Reps. And I'm not coming out of every practice saying, okay, well, hey, this guy's ahead, this guy's not. I think it's firmly right now Nix and Stidham, 1A, 1B, no particular order. It's really between these 2 guys. And regardless, Jarrett Stidham's going to be on this roster no matter what, because even if he's the backup, he's a veteran guy who's been in some good locker rooms. He understands the game. He can help Bo with certain things and vice versa. Bo can learn a little bit from him, even if he doesn't start. But as we've said before, even if Stidham starts, there's going to be this acclimation process where the fan base, like the moment the offense struggles, the first time they go 3 and out 2 times in a row, they're going to be calling for Bo to come out there and play. So,
and I'm not convinced that's doing Stidham any favors at all.
No, not at all.
Again, a guy with 4 career NFL starts.
Yeah, so I still think Bo's going to be named the week 1 starter.
I do too.
It's just like
I've felt that way since prior to the draft.
The hard part about our job is just like you hear it every day. Everyone, like different media outlets, different people with opinions are just like, oh, well, this guy should be the starter. This guy. I'm like, no, let it just play out. Like I put a tweet out on Twitter today talking about what the coaching staff is exactly looking for. And so it's going to be fun. Like, just let it play out, Broncos country. Practice isn't going to define how this team's going to do in the regular season. They have to get there. There's a lot of ground that they got to make up in order to do so.
And keep in mind when you're talking about the quarterbacks, and this would be the thing to keep in mind whether you're out here at camp or whether you're following from afar. The coaching staff knows where each person started from. And as Cody made it very clear, Jarrett Stidham starts out ahead. So the truth of the matter is if the gap has closed from where it started, then Bo Nix in many ways is actually already ahead because the coaching staff knows Stidham has an edge. He was here last year. He's worked with Sean Payton. Nix has not. So Nix doesn't have to necessarily overtake Stidham because as long as the gap closed, you could basically, if you think of it as a race with the Olympics going on right now, if you start a lap down, but you finished half a lap down, guess which one was actually faster? Yeah. The person who was in theory in quote unquote second. And that's the way coaches look at it too. He is Cody Roark. Make sure you check out everything he's putting together at Mile High Sports, the Locked On Broncos podcast. He's easy to find and he's out here every single day. So check out everything Cody does for the latest with the Broncos. We will be back with Sandy Clough from Broncos training camp at Dove Valley next on Mile High Sports. Boom. I'm assuming welcome back to Mile High Sports. It is Broncos training camp. We're live from Broncos Park out at Dove Valley. Anilo Piro, you had a chance to catch him yesterday with Cody Roark. Great stuff from Cody today, by the way. Sitting in Anilo, appreciate it. But let's piggyback on what we just heard from Cody. The idea that we still believe that everything is on track for Bo Nix to start week one. The plan is for Bo Nix to start. We talk about the quarterback competition, something I've tried to get out of people's heads. There's no competition. It's just a matter of time until Bo Nix takes the starting job. The question of when would it be? Well, here would be the question, right? Because everyone has opinions about, well, you can't start him in Seattle. It'd be too soon. You can't start him in this. It's too loud. You can't start him in this. Well, okay. It's very easy for people to look at it and say, well, you can't. Well, okay, let's try a little constructive criticism. Why can't you? What would be the actual risk of saying Bo Nix is the starter on week one, starting him in Seattle? What's the actual risk? Is Bo Nix going to mentally collapse like a house of cards and never be able to play quarterback again? I mean, it's very easy to lob that stuff, but then in the end, you're like, what's really going to happen? If he's actually an NFL caliber quarterback, why would going to Seattle throw him off at all?
Yeah, I don't think it's about the risk per se. I think it's about the perception. And I think, you and I have talked about this. Other guys at the studio have talked about this. Sean Payton essentially pushed his chips all the way into the middle of the table when the Broncos ended up drafting Bo Nix after they take that massive dead cap hit with a guy like Russell Wilson. So I think by delaying Bo Nix potentially, let's say he doesn't start week one. Let's say they put him in the middle of the season or towards the end of the regular season to see what they got. It limits when you start your stopwatch, because the moment that Bo Nix is inserted into these regular season games, the moment that Bo Nix is anointed as the starting quarterback for the Denver Broncos, that's when the pressure for him to perform is on. Versus you already know that this season might be a little bit of a wash year. You know the cap situation that you're up against. You know you've got some holes to fill on both sides of the ball. Why throw Bo Nix into the fire if you feel like the body of work with your team is not ready to set him up for success? And with that thought as well, I just think that you're probably going to lose a handful of your first 4 or 5 games. Why make Bo Nix go through those growing pains and force the media to kind of look at you and start to demonize him when you can throw Jarrett Stidham into the fire and preserve Bo Nix's image, for lack of a better phrase?
I suppose, that is an argument, but to play devil's advocate with that, I guess, Anil, here would be my thought process. This year, because of the cap situation, because of the schedule, the over-under in Vegas is 5.5 wins for the Broncos. Obviously, Cody feels that they can win 9 or 10 and improve on last year, but I think he's in the minority. Look, I hope by the time we get to the end of the season, Cody comes back on the program and gets to rub my nose in it and say, I told you so, because they won 10 games and went to the playoffs. I would love it. I love being wrong when that happens.
You and me both.
But I don't think that's the case. And if that's the case, and the Broncos are not going to be a playoff team, and they're going to win roughly 5 games or 6 games, they're going to have a top 5 pick in the draft. So you don't want to do, and I mentioned this yesterday, you don't want to necessarily do what the Cardinals did years ago. And you picked Josh Rosen in the first round. And
right.
After 1 year, it was pretty clear that Rosen was not going to be the solution. You have a top pick and you're like, well, you know what? I guess we're picking back-to-back first-round quarterbacks. They went with Kyler Murray. That was the right choice. If Bo Nix can't cut it and you're in the top 5 and there's Carson Beck and Quinn Ewers and maybe Shedeur Sanders and whoever else bubbles up into that top 5, and you need a quarterback, you need to know if that's where you got to go immediately. And that means the more starts you can get Bo Nix, the more opportunities to evaluate him, the better. But I do see your point, and that's one of the ones that I think that's fair. That doesn't happen in a vacuum. If Bo Nix, for whatever reason, doesn't seem to be fitting with the team well enough, you still have to prioritize the team's opportunity to win better. So if you think that Stidham gives you a better chance to win today, that's a defensible argument.
Well, and I think it's the combination of that and also not wanting to fracture Bo Nix's confidence, right? I mean, look, you know who I'm very curious to see how they perform, and it's not a Bronco?
He started 61 games.
I guess that's a good point. But do you want Bryce Young? Do you? I mean, look at what's going on. I don't know what Bryce Young is going to be for the Carolina Panthers.
We'll find out when they play the Broncos this year.
That's a great point.
But here's the difference that I think the Broncos have tried to do. 4 of their 5 offensive linemen are returning. They paid Quinn Miners. His extension will kick in a couple years. Yeah, the center position is up for grabs a little bit. But we talked with Ryan Harris earlier this week, Super Bowl winning tackle for the Denver Broncos. And Ryan pointed out specifically that that's the easiest position on the line to fill. So if you've got to fill one, center's the one. So the Broncos have invested heavily. Last year was Powers and McGlinchey. They're paying Garrett Bowles, who has the highest cap hit on the team. And now they've extended Miners with the new deal. They're investing heavily in protecting the quarterback, whoever that quarterback is. But now that it's aligning with Bo Nix, I think that part's interesting too. And maybe a difference with what you saw when you're talking about a player like Bryce Young, or a player maybe years ago like David Carr, who ended up with the most sacks in history for a rookie, and he never really was the guy that you expected him to be. And that's an intriguing parallel for me, because I've made the argument, this may not make Broncos fans super excited, but I look at the comp for Bo Nix, and I look at the way he plays, the style of play. I look at him as if he's Derek Carr. I think that's the kind of quarterback that Bo Nix is. He's got a little more ability with his legs, but I think that's the kind of quarterback. He's not Drew Brees,
right?
But he is kind of a Derek Carr, and if you put a good team around, he can win. Yeah. But that leads to your point, where maybe this isn't necessarily a Nix versus Stidham decision. This is, can the Broncos beat the team opposite again this weekend against them?
Well, and I go back and kind of connecting some dots, right? And I forget the name of the reporter that did the interview with Sean Payton yesterday, but she's from the NFL Network. And one of the things that I saw across social media is Sean Payton was talking about how he was talking to Greg Penner and said, in 3 or 4 years from now, we're going to look back and we're going to say this draft class that we just went through is a building block for what we are today, obviously kind of thinking into the future. And also, reading between the lines, looking at Cody's reports on social media and on milehighsports.com, Bo Nix looks like a rookie. Does Bo Nix look good? Has he done some good stuff? Absolutely. Does he look totally comfortable? Does he look cool, calm, and collected, a la a CJ Stroud, who was inserted to the Texans last year and just lit it up right away? And I guess it comes down to the comparing and the contrasting of, do you want to let Bo Nix work through those growing pains in NFL play, NFL games, all that kind of stuff? Or do you default to your veteran in Jarrett Stidham, let him kind of ease you into the season and ramp up and build Bo Nix confidence through practice, through the preseason as these games progress? I just think the Broncos, because they've been so jaded with drafting quarterbacks in years past or signing quarterbacks, you need to try to do everything in your power to get this one right.
Well,
and if giving him a couple extra days or a couple extra games to let him ramp up is going to accomplish that, again, it's the 3 or 4 year plan. You do that, in my opinion.
And that does make sense. And that part is interesting. The idea of Stidham, though, as being some sort of a long-term veteran is interesting, too, because Stidham hasn't been in the league that long. He's only started 4 games in his career total. So you're not talking about, a McCown or a Hoyer, where you have those guys that have been around, for a decade as a backup, and at least what you're going to get out of it. It's not as if we know exactly what we're going to get out of Jarrett Stidham. He's been on 3 teams in 4 years. If NFL teams had thought he had been a solidified, consistent player, he wouldn't be bouncing around as much. And that's not an insult to Stidham. Stidham profiles around the league as a long-term backup.
Yes.
You can make an awful lot of money that way. It's not a bad gig. Just ask the McCowns and Hoyers of the world.
I'll take that gig.
Yeah, exactly. But it does mean that your upside with Stidham is probably significantly lower when it comes to your 3 or 4 year plan. Stidham more of a veteran, and his contract ends after this season, than it would be for Nix, where the idea is, let him get in there and see if he can swim. I think back to what Peyton Manning talked about when he was honored by the Mazzell Institute this summer. And he spoke specifically about how he and his brother Eli Manning were basically thrown into the fire. They needed to be. Of course, they were top picks.
Right.
And he felt strongly that they would not have reached the levels that they did, were they not, if they had to wait. And that's interesting, because that was now by this stretch, this 20 years ago, a totally different era of football. And there's still the idea that Aaron Rodgers somehow became Aaron Rodgers because he's behind Brett Favre, although neither Rodgers nor Favre will top to that. And so there are those different schools of thought. And the funny thing is, here we are all these years into NFL football, and you don't really know which one is right or wrong. It depends probably on your evaluation of your team and of the actual person playing quarterback, less than the quarterback skills.
Well, and to play a little devil's advocate with myself, just after I talk about how
I love doing that.
Playing Bo Nix maybe later in the season isn't such a bad idea, but it's something that you brought up. And I like your comparison there of the Mannings to, say, an Aaron Rodgers type. I don't think there's a secret formula that everyone can follow to draft and develop these quarterbacks, but you have to, skill set and mentality aside from a guy like Bo Nix, look at the intangibles. You bring up the great point about the experience as a starting quarterback at the collegiate level.
Unprecedented.
Playing at the SEC, playing, in the Pac-12 with Oregon and whatnot. But then also look at who he's going to be coached by. Sean Payton is considered to be this quarterback guru, this quarterback whisperer. So you're comparing, or you're combining the fact that you've got a tremendous amount of experience starting at the collegiate level with a head coach who is considered to be one of the more quarterback savvy guys out there. Mm-hmm. Why not throw him into the fire? What more around Bo Nix could you possibly ask for to prepare him for this moment? You've got some solid receivers. We've seen Courtland Sutton making some great plays out here. Tim Patrick bouncing back from injury. You've got Torrey Franklin as well, his guy from back in college. What more can the Broncos do to set him up for success that they have not already done? We talked about the offensive line. Putting all of those things together, maybe you do have to kind of just say, all right, you know what? We're going to dive into the deep end and see how this thing goes. Sink or swim.
Yeah, I think that's the way to go. And I think that's what the Broncos will end up doing. I think some of the contracts have to do with it. When we talk about the three quarterbacks on the roster, I think all three will be here. I think the rule now in the NFL where you can elevate your third quarterback and have him come up unlimited number of times and not have to be exposed on waivers, I think that will have Wilson being here all year. I don't think there's any other team that has any interest in Wilson. They're more than willing to see if the Broncos can do something with him. So I think all three will be here. But yeah, I guess I do look at it and think for the Broncos this year, who are not expected to make the playoffs, not expected to make the Super Bowl, not expected to challenge, this is another one of those years where you build with Sean Payton's guys and you try to see how it fits together. And Bo Nix is one of Sean Payton's guys. Now, Jared Stidham is too. But there's a difference between signing a guy via free agency that's been a backup for a few teams and making sure that you draft a guy in the first round that many draft experts, and I put that in finger quotes for those watching it on YouTube, said they had a second or third round grade on Bo Nix. But is that part of it a consideration too? Should we be looking at Bo Nix as a normal first round rookie if the consensus around at least the league was that he may not really have been that way talent wise? It was just the Broncos were desperate for quarterbacks.
Well, the consensus was that Patrick Mahomes wasn't the best quarterback in his draft class either. So, there's only so much inferring you can do from the experts because these experts tend to get it wrong, a good amount of the time. And
it's so hard to project. I mean, not even piling on them. It's just hard to project.
Yeah. And look, I know that not everybody here is a Sean Payton guy. I know there's some people that he rubs the wrong way and people think that the, overinflation of the ego, whatever it might be. But he loved him some Bo Nix. Mm-hmm. Would he have also liked a J.J. McCarthy or a Jaden Daniels or a Caleb Williams had the Broncos been in that situation? Absolutely. But at the end of the day, for a guy in Sean Payton whose body of work as a head coach has been better more often than not, I'm going to trust him. We knew that he was not a Russell Wilson guy. He knew that it came with the territory of taking this job. But now Sean Payton, in his eyes, has identified a guy that he feels like he can build a sustainable future with. And if Sean Payton feels that way, maybe it's fool's gold on my end for kind of putting my blind trust into him. But we're still talking about one of the more consistent winning head coaches in the NFL in recent memory. I have to see how that plays out. I personally have to trust Sean Payton, regardless of what these so-called draft analysts have been saying, because like I said, there has been countless examples of guys, Paxton Lynch, Dak Prescott. I mean, there's a number of examples of guys who have higher grades out of the draft that are outperformed by guys that were drafted later. So we shall see.
Yeah, we'll find out, and we'll talk a little bit about those receivers that he'll be throwing to because that's a factor in it as well. But I want to remind you that all our camp coverage brought to you in part by our friends at Rolling Smoke. And so when you're talking barbecue, you've been all around the country. There's all these different varieties. You've had a chance to try a bunch of different kinds. I'm sure I have as well. But along the Front Range, Rolling Smoke is where I end up going. Over 10 years ago, Terry of Rolling Smoke started this with just a food truck, but he knew what he was doing. And it became so popular that he's got 4 locations serving up all the best hardwood meats with sides made fresh daily. And a lot of those 10 years have changed, but Terry's commitment is the same, serving you and your family the best barbecue in town, the best way they can make it, as fresh as they can make it. When it's out, it's out. So keep that in mind. But they do have 4 locations: in Aurora, inside the Stanley Marketplace; in Golden, inside the Golden Mill; at the corner of Dry Creek and University and Centennial. That's where you'll see me probably at least once a week. If you're a cardiologist, don't hit me up, but don't judge me. It's not your job. And now the newest location at 38th Avenue at Wheat Ridge. And by the way, if you're up at a concert at Red Rocks this summer, you can get Rolling Smoke barbecue there too. So if you're thinking about trying it, skip the hot dogs, skip those kind of snacks that you're thinking for default. Get yourself some top quality barbecue. And then when you come down back after the concert, you're going to want to pick out one of those 4 great locations and get it for yourself. You can get it for your family, get it for yourself, get it catered for the big party, everything in between. They're easy to find. You can order online, pick it up, or set up the catering any way you'd like, or drop in any of those spots. Rolling Smoke Barbecue online at rollingsmokebbq.com. Looking at the wide receiver room, you touched on it, Anilo, and I think part of that has been really fascinating because being out here at camp, one of the things I'm seeing before practices start, that you've seen at times, but I think now especially it's been pretty pronounced. Courtland Sutton has been in charge of this wide receiver room. He ends up talking to the guys a lot. He gets them into huddles, talks a lot about it. You'll hear him firing guys up on the sidelines. When you see the wide receivers grouping up, you see number 14 there, and you see everyone else looking at him. So that kind of leadership from Courtland Sutton, we have seen it. He's been considered one of the leaders in the locker room. He's not a very public guy. When he's asked a lot by the media, he's pretty quiet, but seems to be comfortable, at least this year, with the contract adjustment. We haven't heard anything about that. He seems to have just dove all the way in, and he's taking charge of that wide receiver room. How valuable is that? Even though this wide receiver room isn't really all that young, there's some younger players. They added, of course, Troy Franklin and Devon Vele, and Marvin Mims in the second year. But Josh Reynolds, the new addition's been around. We know about some of those players, and Tim Patrick's back, of course, as well. But seeing Sutton sort of take the reins here, that to me is a little bit interesting, because I think as it stands today, we know who wide receiver 1 is, and there's no question. It's Sutton. Reynolds is probably 2. 3, the presumption is it's Mims. I'm not so sure yet. We'll talk about that. But seeing Sutton this engaged after an offseason in which you could tell that, quite frankly, both sides, the Broncos and Sutton, might have preferred a split. Seeing the fact that Sutton seems to be all the way back in is a good sign for the Broncos, and it's got to be a great sign for Bo Nix and Jarrett Stidham.
Yeah, and I mean, what's the old saying? Cooler heads prevail. And once you kind of got out of the heat of the moment there of the season, and I'm sure the mounting frustration from Courtland Sutton's part of kind of having to just play that role of good soldier, regardless of the carousel of quarterbacks that, you've been getting the ball from for the last 4 or 5 seasons, right? And I think, we saw him make a couple of excellent catches here during the initial sequence of training camp. He's a big body guy. Mm-hmm. He's exactly what you want for a young quarterback like a Bo Nix, or even, a middle of the line veteran type guy and Jarrett Stidham. You want guys that can go up and grab the ball and make plays for you. And I'm happy that they were able to find some sort of common ground. Like, I don't think Courtland Sutton obviously got the multi-year lucrative extension that he was initially looking for, but I almost said the Rockies. I don't know what deal the Rockies have sweetened in a long time. The Broncos, though, sweetened the deal for him a little bit entering into this training camp period, giving him some more money, giving him some more incentives. And at the end of the day, I can't fault Courtland Sutton for his frustration with the Denver Broncos. I can't fault Courtland Sutton for wanting to explore some options outside of playing for the Broncos, because, just off the top of my head, he's had 7 or 8 different quarterbacks in the last 3 or 4 years. So if you're right. Courtland Sutton, he's probably thinking to himself, well, you're seeing guys like Amon-Ra St. Brown. You're seeing guys like Justin Jefferson getting paid. DJ Moore just got paid, right? Big salaries. And if you're Courtland Sutton, you're probably thinking to yourself, the only way I'm going to be able to get close to those guys in the financial situation is upping my numbers, upping my production. And how do you up your numbers and up your production? You need quality quarterback play.
Right.
And Courtland Sutton has been thrown, just this mixed bag of quarterbacks, whether it's Teddy Bridgewater, whether it's Drew Lock, whether it's a washed Russell Wilson. The lack of a competent quarterback, I think, has inhibited not just Courtland Sutton, but all of the Denver Broncos skill position players from reaching their true potential. And so that's where I think it's important for the Broncos to keep him happy, keep him satisfied, because now that you're kind of changing your culture and changing your direction, you need some vets, you need guys that have been there and done that. But also from Courtland's perspective, you need to make sure that you're getting yours and you're taken care of for enduring and dealing with all of the nonsense that has revolved around the Broncos quarterback position for virtually his entire career.
Look at this. So, okay, last year, Russell Wilson and Jarrett Stidham, right? 2022, Russell Wilson and Brett Rippon. You go back to 2021, then you have Teddy Bridgewater and Drew Lock, right? You go to 2020, you have Drew Lock and Jeff Driscoll, and Rippon started again, and so did technically Kendall Hinton / Philip Lindsay. But then you go back to 2019, Joe Flacco included in there, Brandon Allen in there. You're talking about 8 quarterbacks. It's actually more than that. It's 9, because Case Keenum in 2018 was the quarterback for the Denver Broncos too. 9 quarterbacks in what has been only 6 seasons thus far for Courtland Sutton, and now he'll have a 10th going into his 7th.
Absolutely. And look, I'm not trying to make excuses, nor is Courtland Sutton, but anybody with a brain can sit back and say, you know what, Courtland Sutton's numbers would probably be a little bit better.
With any consistency.
Exactly.
Right.
I'm not even talking like the greatest of the great quarterbacks. An average guy, I don't know. It's hard to get more dysfunctional at the quarterback position than what the Broncos have had to deal with over those last 6 seasons. And like I said, if I'm Courtland Sutton, I'm sitting back and saying, hey, maybe my numbers aren't as good as this receiver, that receiver, or this receiver, but I know my skill set is. I know I am as good as these guys. Maybe my numbers aren't reflective of that, but that's not on me. That's on the quarterback. That's on the organization.
Mm-hmm.
I get it from his perspective.
I do too, and didn't get a massive difference. You know, the 1.5 million roughly in additional incentives, so the Broncos don't have to pay any more whatsoever. But at least it gives Sutton an opportunity to make more money if things go well for him. But it is really kind of fascinating to see this season go, because Sutton again last year 772 yards. 10 touchdowns. The 10 touchdowns, one of only a half dozen players who reached that level, and nobody reached it with fewer catches than Sutton's 59. That's a touchdown every 6 catches. Now, that is not sustainable. That's a little bit fluky. But that kind of stability and that kind of ability that if he can get, let's say, with a Bo Nix, and you start establishing a relationship with the Bo Nix early, that's an advantage for both. Because Nix becomes comfortable with his top receiver. And let's be honest, if you talk to wide receivers around the league, they'll tell you there's a little politicking here and there, depending on who wants the ball, right? And so if you're Courtland Sutton, you look like you're the man in charge. You're the clear wide receiver one, and you're showing that you can help Bo Nix out. Why isn't Nix going to look to you first? Of course he is. And then in the end, that's better for the Broncos, and it's better for Courtland Sutton, who eventually gets paid.
Yeah, and I mean, like, that's just kind of the dynamic in the NFL these days. I mean, like, look at all the recent young quarterbacks that have had success. They're usually able to align themselves to 1 or 2 really solid skill position players. I think, obviously, last year, the team that burst onto the scene was the Houston Texans.
Right.
Now you had Tank Dell. Now you got Stephon Diggs, right? Mm-hmm. You set him up for success. You know, when Patrick Mahomes first came into the league, he had his guy in Travis Kelce, who he immediately developed the rapport with. Obviously, Tyreek Hill was there at that point, too. Buffalo, we'll see how Josh Allen does without Stephon Diggs, but the Stephon Diggs, Josh Allen dynamic is what helped take Buffalo to that next level on top of the natural progression. So Cooper Kupp and Matthew Stafford. I know Stafford's a little bit more of a veteran, but you know, this is a template that you can follow where you want your quarterback to have a couple of guys where he can rest his head at night and say, I know Courtland Sutton's got me. I know if I got to throw the fade route on our 15 or on the opposing team's 15-yard line, I can throw that ball up to Tim Patrick and he's going to go up there and get that ball for me. I know if we're, you know, on our own 45-yard line and I got press coverage, I can get Marvin Mims on the outside to get some separation. You want to develop those relationships so you can build that confidence of a guy like a Bo Nix. But I think to kind of bring it full circle on the wide receiver competition, the Broncos receivers, I don't think are regarded as highly as they could be because of that dysfunction that has ensued. And that's why I'm excited. I'm excited to see what they can do.
It wasn't that long ago, and for all sorts of reasons that we certainly don't have time to do in just the length of this show. But it wasn't all that long ago that the idea that Tim Patrick, Jerry Jeudy, and Courtland Sutton were considered across the NFL landscape as one of the very best receiving corps. Now, that always looks to be a bit of an exaggeration because the best predictor of success is success.
Yes.
So if you've actually done it, then there's some really reason to believe you can do it again. When you're projecting that a group's never really done it, and then they're going to do it, that changes things.
Look at Courtland Sutton sprinting right there.
So, you know, Sutton's
a horse.
Just going, you know, the guy's just going back and forth, and he definitely has the incentive. You can see it. That Sutton is out there to do the best for both the Denver Broncos and for himself. And the funny thing is, at times we look at it, and I think fans tend to look at it and go, well, you know, that's a selfish thing. No, this is a business. And the funny thing is, you know, if you're this is a capitalist society, and if you think that's how it's supposed to work, then this is how it's supposed to work. The person is paid or wants to get paid, and then they make an effort to get paid by the organization or paid by someone else who values them more.
Right.
And that's what the organization's role is to do as well, to collect the best by making sure they're paid what they deserve. So it's funny, you talk about players sometimes when they hold out or they have these sort of discussions, and Sutton did not hold out. No, did not. But you can't have it both ways. You can't go that, oh, well, this guy's worried about his contract. That's kind of selfish. And then also get excited when players are in their, quote, contract year because you assume they're going to play harder. It can't be both, right? So in Sutton's case, I look at this as a good opportunity for both the Broncos and Sutton, because in this case, because of the financial arrangement, they're actually both on the same page. They want the same thing. The Denver Broncos would love to be able to have a problem and say Courtland Sutton was so good, we've got to get him a new deal at $18 million per or more.
Right.
They'd love to be able to say that because that means they have a top receiver in the league. And if Courtland Sutton makes that money, they're like, great, we'd love to pay that. But they were more than happy to pay Quinn Miners an extension. When it kicks in, it'll pay him $20 million or more a year because they have their guy and they're happy and they're confident with it. So this is actually how it works at the pro level. These sort of contractual things, yes, do they change motivation? They sure do. And if we're going to be honest, and you look at yourself in the mirror and think, does that affect me at my job? It probably does. No different out here on the football field.
Well, and look at the difference in how the situation was handled between Courtland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy. And I don't want to pile on Jerry Jeudy, right? I think he's got all the talent.
Split was best for everybody. And it would not shock me if he was really good in Cleveland this year. It would not surprise me at all.
He needed a change of scenery. But I also felt like, I don't know what the right word is, but like a little sulking, a little pouting
there was
from Jerry Jeudy.
Sure.
And look, Courtland Sutton as well. You know, a lot of these guys weren't very happy with how things have been going. But I could tell you from being in that locker room after a handful of games last year, you know what Courtland Sutton did despite how bad they would lose? Second the cameras were in front, zoop, game face, ready to go. Understands the business part of it, changes the body language, right? You're still obviously going to be frustrated and all that kind of stuff, but he gets it. There's a maturity level of understanding that you can control what you can control and letting the rest take care of itself from there. And, you know, I wish Jerry Jeudy the best. I was a big Jerry Jeudy guy. I'm frustrated that it didn't pan out there, but you also like to take a page out of the Denver Nuggets book a little bit. Outside of just getting lucky and drafting Nikola Jokic and having him be the greatest player in modern NBA history right now, you know, one thing that I think is we can attribute to the Nuggets' sustainability and success is drafting and retaining high character guys, high character players. I think Courtland Sutton's that way.
Mm-hmm.
I think Tim Patrick's that way. I think Marvin Mims, we're seeing some of that, where regardless of the wins and the losses, they're comfortable in their own skin and are able to keep the boat steady. The way the Broncos have been the worst in years past is when the boat is rocking and not everybody's on the same page.
And that's a good point because you talk about that, and I think that is important, and it's a really good observation because the idea behind it is, what does that really mean, right? You're comfortable in your own skin. That's good. But also, you know what your job is. Okay, you know what? Win or lose, I'm supposed to give the same effort. Game face. Let's get ready. Let's go do the job. And you know what? Sometimes you win and sometimes you lose. It means that when you come back and practice and next week, you got to approach it the exact same way. And that requires sometimes a bit of maturity. And that's, I think, when you get Bo Nix, who's already 24 with all the starts, you have a guy that is maybe a little more comfortable in his own skin. He just bought a house with a significant other out in Castle Pines. He's comfortable in his own skin and understands what he wants. And you hear some of the quotes from Mike McGlinchey, who talked about how Nix is actually, he appreciates it, but he's like, it's almost too much because Nix is coming up to every lineman. How can I do this better? How can I do this better? And that indicates that what Nix does is he knows the job. And that doesn't surprise me because when Sean Payton locked into him early in the draft process, and I mean early in the draft process, that told me that Sean Payton saw that Drew Brees mentality of like, this is the job. And he saw that from Nix and figured, hey, if I can get that, the rest of it will come. And that's probably the right way to do it. But we'll talk more about the other parts, the tight ends as well, some of the valuable parts of the quarterbacking position. You want that security blanket. But you're a member of the Denver Athletic Club, and there's a great opportunity to become a member and join a Nilo at one of the more significant places in Denver history over a century. Tell them about it.
I am a massive fan of the Denver Athletic Club. And if you're looking for the perfect place to work, play, exercise, and socialize, look no further than our friends over at the DAC. The Denver Athletic Club is located right in the heart of downtown Denver. As a DAC member, you'll enjoy top-notch amenities like a full fitness center that is open 24 hours a day, licensed childcare center, spas, massages, Pilates, and a golf simulator. Plus, there's so much more for you to explore at the DAC. But what truly sets the Denver Athletic Club apart is its vibrant community. This member-owned club is all about you, offering year-round social events, co-working, dining, and fun for the entire family. The Denver Athletic Club is truly a club for your whole life. And now for a limited time, new members will pay a $0 initiation fee. Join the DAC today. And guys, I cannot recommend it enough. I spend like 3 or 4 hours a day there. So if you're a fan of Mile High Sports, you can find me in the study, chopping my clips, writing my articles, doing the social media. It is great because you can walk in there in your work attire, go right up to the locker room, change, get a quick sweat in, hit the sauna, sauna, hit the steam room, hit the cold plunge. They've got a bowling alley in there. They've got a pub in there. So if you want a little brew, if you want a little tequila, if you want a steak, they do steak night on Fridays. They've got the rooftop, which is where I like to go sit out and chill after my workout and soak in some sunshine. Guys, I cannot recommend it enough. The Denver Athletic Club, it truly is a club for your whole life. Let them know that Mile High Sports brought you in. I guarantee you will not be disappointed. Be sure to check out our friends over at the Denver Athletic Club.
As my old co-host many times years ago, Rod Smith once said, free 99 is the right price. Zero.
Yes.
Zero in initiation fees. You can't get any better than that. Looking over at the tight ends, we watched Greg Dulcich come onto the field, obviously, today, and Dulcich has been practicing. Dulcich, the third-round pick from a couple of seasons ago, has played in 12 of a possible 34 games for the Broncos, and that's a problem. And you can only get into about 1 out of every 3. That is an issue. You have to be available to be able to help your team. Dulcich last year was basically a total loss. 2 games played, 3 catches for 25 yards. It was that rookie season when he had 33 catches for 411 yards and a pair of touchdowns that got people excited, because the truth of the matter is you go to 411 yards receiving last year on the Denver Broncos, that would have been 4th behind only Sutton Judy and Samaje Perine. So the idea that Greg Dulcich doesn't have to become immeasurably better to make an impact on the Broncos offense is probably real. The former walk-on at UCLA has a lot of speed. He's got good hands. He's got physical ability. He needs to get better at blocking, as do most tight ends that come into the league nowadays. But Dulcich is a willing blocker, and guys that are willing blockers tend to do all right. But he is not, and we'll say this again with the old finger quotes, he is not a Sean Payton guy. He arrived before
Good point.
Sean Payton. Sean Payton doesn't really have a chance to know Greg Dulcich. He didn't really watch that rookie year. He saw some things on film, I'm sure. What he saw last year was a guy that couldn't, unfortunately, get out of the health room, and there's nothing you can do about that. It's not his fault. But I think many Broncos fans look at this and they look at how the team could make a move forward, and there's this sort of assumption that, Greg Dulcich is going to bust out this year and make a big difference for the offense. Well, we have no question that he could. But there is a big difference. If you look at the way that Sean Payton has talked about Greg Dulcich and the way that fans look about it based on that rookie year, in the way he's perceived that, you try to talk to Sean Payton about Greg Dulcich, and it's like pulling teeth. And what you'll eventually get out of him is he's healthy, he's practicing, and all our tight ends that were expected to practice are practicing. He's not talking about, we can't wait to unleash him. We can't wait to anything like that. You have Cody Roark over here every single day out on camp saying that Lucas Kroll's the guy that's going to break out, not Greg Dulcich. So the disconnect between the way fans see Dulcich and the way Payton sees Dulcich probably has to do with, one, an abysmal last year, but also the idea that Sean Payton likes his guys. Chris Thomason earlier this week, Anilo, gave us the number that's roughly, it was in the high 20s to low 30s, that by the beginning of the season last year that Sean Payton had brought in, whether free agency, trade, drafts. Now the 91-person roster is 60, 2/3.
Wow.
And, of course, we know it's 53 when you're done, right? So when you're talking about the turnover here, Payton has absolutely been bringing in his guys. Dulcich is not his guy. Can he become it? Of course he can. That's an entirely realistic possibility if he plays well. Quinn Miners became one of Payton's guys, obviously. So if you perform, that's not a problem. But Dulcich right now is kind of stuck in a spot where until he does something, remember we talked about the best measure or estimate of success is to be successful before? Until he does something in front of Sean Payton isn't going to trust that he's going to do something. And that's where he's stuck.
No, and I think that's a great point, because I would throw that in. Everything you just said, I think, is valid. But I would also say this. Outside of quarterback, I think the one position group that the Broncos have been devoid of talent at for the last 4 or 5 years is tight end.
Oh, it's been a disaster.
I mean, Noah Fant was all right. We know what happened with Jake Butt. It seems like
Noah Fant all of a sudden looks like it was Travis Kelce.
Yeah, no, exactly. And, unfortunately,
in retrospect,
looking at the body of work, Greg Dulcich kind of looks like Jake Butt 2.0.
Unfortunately.
Just in regard, I mean, what's the old saying? The best ability is availability.
Availability. That's right.
Exactly. And so I have
Or as Yogi Berra once said, 90% of success is showing up.
Yeah, you're exactly right about that.
Sometimes that's it.
And that's the thing is, look, do I want Greg Dulcich to be successful? Absolutely. Do I think he has a skill set to be successful? 100%. But at the end of the day, in my head, he's almost still like a fringe rookie. Like he's almost like this like second-year player just because we haven't seen him. The jury is still completely out on Greg Dulcich because when we have seen, the sample size has been ultra limited.
Yeah, and the problem now is you have almost a full year in which you didn't see him at all.
Exactly.
And that's, I think, a difference when
It's
you
like
separate.
like a red shirt.
Yeah, if we
Like
were to look at,
fifth
let's
year.
say in comparison, it's been 2 years, 2 years for Tim Patrick, unfortunately, because of injuries.
Yes.
But you have seen productive NFL seasons from Tim Patrick. So you can at least look back at that and say, we can believe that if Tim Patrick is healthy, we know that he can do something because we've seen him do it. In Dulcich's case, it's still all just projection. And that's a concern because I think fans do expect at many points when I talk to them to the idea that Dulcich is going to step up and be a big part of it. Look, I presume the Broncos hope he is. I hope the Broncos are looking at this hoping that Troutman and Dulcich and Kroll and Nate Adkins all blow up and they have the tight end situation where it's outstanding and it's deep. But the reality is it's not. And Troutman finds himself in an outstanding position, even though the numbers last year were not good because, again, availability matters. And Troutman has done that. And he does a little bit of everything. But I do wonder how important this season is, not only for Dulcich, for the Broncos at tight end, because if you think of Sean Payton wanting to rebuild as best as possible, the kind of offense that he had in New Orleans under Drew Brees, which is, at least according to Sean Payton, the plan.
Right.
Well, they had Jimmy Graham for a lot of that. And what do you do if you don't have one? Well, it makes things different. Now, yes, they also had Kamara. They had Mark Ingram. They had a lot of things the Broncos don't have right now. Maybe the Broncos running back room has enough talent that you can start resembling and assembling pieces of that. But the tight end position right now is something that no defensive unit in the NFL looks and worries about. If you're the Broncos, picture it now. You're a Broncos fan. You watch the Kansas City Chiefs play. And you're watching the Broncos line up, I guarantee you're probably doing what most people are like, where's 87? Where's 87?
Yep.
Where's 87? Because that guy's going to wreck your game. Nobody plays the Denver Broncos and say, where's 82?
No.
Where's 80?
No.
They don't. And so the ability to deceive a defense is minimized. And the reality is at the NFL level, everyone's running 90% of the same plays. It is about the way you deceive it, the way that you package it, so it looks like you're doing something else. The entire NFL offensive strategy can be boiled down to you and I are baseball guys, to this baseball thing. As long as your curveball gets released from the same arm slot, or your changeup gets released from the same arm slot as your fastball, you're going to fool people.
Right.
And that's basically what NFL offenses try to do. You try to line it up so they can't tell what you're doing. But if you don't have to worry about the tight end position, I don't know how much this offense can really get going under Nick Stidham or anybody else.
Well, you know what the Broncos offense has been for the last few seasons? And I know maybe some of it's not fair because this is only Sean Payton's second year. It's just been generic.
It's been very vanilla.
It's been great value brand offense, right? It's like halfback dive, halfback toss, like quick slants, right? Like just nothing creative about it. And I think, we saw some of that frustration, I think, settle in last season with Sean Payton. Just because he's usually considered to be one of those more creative, dynamic guys with his offense. He likes to tailor things to his specific skill set, his preferences, his likings and whatnot. And, to kind of bring it all back to the Bo Nix conversation as well, that's where you hope Bo Nix and him are going to be on the same page. And whether it's the tight end position, whether it's been the running back situation, whether it's been the wide receiver dynamic, they have just been very, very mute across the board, very predictable. And I think what's the number 16 that the Bronco fan holds their breath at because they scored 16 points in like more than half of their game or something like that? I forget exactly what it was.
Once you can actually get, with 3 scores in a game, it feels like you're
That's actually impressive. It's almost hard to be that mediocre
at the NFL level. It is,
and
year after year it is.
That's where I just think you want to see. And I'll be honest, Shawn, I haven't seen much of it here at training camp. I need to see some life injected back into this offense.
And I'm glad you brought that up because some of that does come back to Sean Payton. Because one of the things I look at, we talk about, Dulcich breaking out. Marvin Mims had 377 yards and 1 touchdown. There is this presumption that Marvin Mims is going to become one of the best slot receivers in the league this year and all that. Marvin Mims' ability didn't show up late in the season. But Sean Payton and the Broncos offense couldn't figure out a way to work Marvin Mims in consistently last year. And it wasn't as if he wasn't ready, and it wasn't as if they couldn't have used him. But you're right, it was so vanilla and so bland that they couldn't even find a way to work Mims into it.
Yeah, and I forget which game it was last year, but there was a couple of those moments where, like, I remember I was sitting with Cody, and I was just like, why are they not, like, running plays designed for Marvin Mims? Like, he's like the one guy that, like, it feels like he's going to be able to get open. And it's funny, in the offseason, Marvin Mims even came out and said, Russ just wasn't looking for me. Russ wasn't trying to throw me the ball. And so I think those are the types of things that you hope get corrected now as you move forward into year 2 of the Sean Payton era. Because like I said, man, they've got the raw talent. They've got the intangibles. It's just a matter of kind of putting it all together. And obviously that is going to be Sean Payton's job. And it's going to be up to Bo Nix to kind of take those marching orders and carry them out in the manner in which Sean Payton wants them to be done. So, and here's what I'll say as well in regards to what we've seen so far from training camp. I can expect the Broncos defense to be a little bit more ferocious, a little bit more on top of it, just because they know what they're doing, right? Similar scheme, similar coordinator, all that kind of stuff as well. But the fact that there's been a lack of oomph, I know that's not even a word, but like a lack of just like jaw-dropping, exciting plays from the offense.
John Madden and John Gruden would have liked it. So
there you go. It's a little concerning to me. It really is, because I come into this expecting the Denver Broncos defense to win every single day. The fact that we've had almost a grasp for straws. Well, Bo Nix is looking all right. He's still a rookie, though. Oh, Audric Estime playing physical, but it's in the walkthrough, right? The fact that we haven't had many things to hang our hat on from this Denver Broncos offense so far in training camp does get me concerned just a little bit.
And it becomes difficult. Obviously, we'll talk more about this as the training camp goes along and the preseason goes along. But that's what's kind of funny when you're looking at practices at camp. And I want to keep that in mind for fans who are coming out too. Remember, they're going against the Denver Broncos defense. So it can become difficult to understand, like, is the Broncos defense maybe a lot better than you think? Or is the Broncos offense maybe less impressive than you think?
Here's the thing, though.
And that just takes time. We have to zoom out over the course of the training camp and decide that. But in these small moments, it's difficult to tell which is which.
The Denver Broncos defense is good. It's not top 5 good.
No,
we know that.
I think it might be top half good.
Yes.
I don't think it's solid. I don't think it's even going to be top 10 good.
It's like a B plus on its best day.
Yes.
Right? Like, they are a solid unit.
I think they are a top 15 defense, probably hovering in that 10 to 15.
Exactly. I can't sit back though and say, well, they're going up against the Legion of Boom.
Right.
Like no wonder Bo Nix isn't, doing this, or Jarrett Stidham's looking that way, or the receivers are doing this. This is not the Legion of Boom.
You're not sitting out there with the no-fly zone like you were almost a decade ago, right?
It is not. Look, this defense is good. It is not these guys. And that's where it's like, the fact that we haven't had that tried and true, wow, Bo Nix was incredible. Jarrett Stidham looked sharp. Torrey Franklin was great. Audric Estime here. Like, the fact that we've yet to have one of those giddy, almost delusional days about the offense, the fact that we're having to almost grasp at these straws, to me, there's still a lot of time for training camp to kind of play out. But what makes you think so far from this training camp period that this season will be anything different than what we've seen from the Broncos the last few years?
Well, I mean, I'm on record of thinking that they're going to win fewer games and maybe significantly fewer games. They could still be moving forward in that plan. But, not to all Allen Iverson this thing, but we are talking about practice. We are talking about practice. It is practice.
But
so
what did we start the show with? It's easier to forecast things when you have a history of it.
That's true.
The Broncos do not have a history in the last 5 or 6 years of doing many things positive.
And so they've lost the benefit of the doubt, and that's fair.
And it is practice, right? But what's different about this practice from practice last year or the year before or the year before? Same song, different dance.
We'll have to find out. Obviously, he is an Elo Piro, Mile High Sports, a Swiss Army knife, like host, social media maven, podcast.
A little bit of this, a little bit of that.
Like everything. And he is a busy man. So I appreciate you stepping in today. And I know you have stuff to do, but thanks for sitting in for a little bit here. Really do appreciate it. I'll be back with a little bit more for you in a moment. I want to remind you about our friends over at Constitute Health. You've heard me talk about them a little bit as we've gotten this training camp coverage going. At Constitute Health, they empower patients on their own journey, complementing existing healthcare and trying to make sure that you can feel comfortable with your health the way you want to feel. And because that matters, right? Some people are looking to sleep better. Some people are looking to lose weight. Some people are looking to make sure that they're a little sharper late in the day. All of these things can be accomplished, but they're individual. And that means you need one-to-one work on that sort of thing. And that's what we do. At Constitute Health, you get specific patient analysis via your blood work. You start with the blood test, and then you work on a one-to-one basis with their medical professionals, providing those patients with complete transparency regarding their health, their concerns, and their goals. The blood work's quick and easy. There's over 2,000 locations locations nationwide, so you can get that. And then you're building the foundation for your optimized health and longevity using cutting-edge medical therapies to help your body perform as it should as you age. It can be hormone replacement, semaglutide or GLP-1 therapies, peptides, NAD, and more, helping with burn fat or weight loss, optimize your sleep and better sleep cycles, enhance your cognitive and executive functions. And if you're looking to build and retain muscle mass, all of those things can be accomplished as well. So check them out at constitutehealth.com. Mention MHS and you can get $50 off your initial blood work and consultation. Or MHS has made it easy for you to look into your health and wellness. And check that Constitute link out at milesports.com for $50 off your initial visit. Given the blood test and $50 off, you're talking about a small amount of money, about $125 to see what your body has been trying to tell you via your blood work and how you can make it better. So check out Constitute Health, where the goal is to optimize your health your way. Check them out at constitutehealth.com. Out of Broncos camp, as things start to wind down a little bit here, and the crowd a little bit sparser today on a Wednesday. Today may be the coolest day of camp so far. That's not saying all that much when it's still pretty toasty outside, but it's not in the 90s for a change. That makes probably everybody happy. There are a couple spots on this team in which you look at competitions that are very real, and some of them are really starting to solidify. So we'll go through a couple of them here, because if you're coming out to camp tomorrow and you're looking at certain things to watch, here's some of the ones that have started to become pretty clear. Now, they're not done yet. The Broncos haven't named starters. They haven't named starters in any position. There's no depth chart yet, and there won't be until closer to the first preseason game. But we talked about Greg Dulcich. Adam Troutman is absolutely secure as the starter. He's going to be very difficult to unseat. Even though Troutman only had 204 receiving yards last year, he did have 3 touchdowns. That 3 touchdowns was tied for third on the team. And to get an idea about receiving touchdowns for the Broncos and how problematic it was, Courtland Sutton led the way with 10, as we all know. Second on the team, probably a trivia question for a lot of Broncos fans. He's still in camp. We haven't talked about him much. Maybe we should. Number 2 in receiving touchdowns with 4 was Brandon Johnson. Troutman was tied with Little Jordan Humphrey for 3. And then you had Julio McLaughlin, the rookie running back, and Javonte Williams with 2, along with Jerry Jeudy, who is now, of course, in Cleveland, and that has something to do with it, despite the 758 yards. But the Broncos desperately need reliability, and they need touchdown catches. Now, Troutman, you'd love to see him get more than 204 yards and 3 touchdowns. But at the moment, given what else you have, who's going to step up? Kroll finished with 8 catches and 95 yards and a touchdown. Adkins had 4 catches for 22 yards, and Dulcich had 3 for 25 yards. So there really aren't tight ends on the roster here that are going to make big differences. And the fact that there really aren't any additions is kind of telling too. It's been a tough position for the Broncos to fill for a while, because all 4 of these guys were here last year. And when you're looking at the tight ends in camp, that's basically it. So the presumption is that you're going with the same 4. They're probably all going to make the team, but Troutman is going to be the starter. And until and unless either Greg Dulcich or Lucas Kroll unseats him, he's going to remain the starter. And it's going to be hard to unseat, because Troutman is by far the best blocking tight end on the team. Adkins is the next best. Kroll and Dulcich are more receiving types. So Troutman is very, very secure in his role. Is it possible that over time he could be overtaken? Absolutely. Is it likely? Quite frankly, not this year, because the Broncos roster more or less is what it is. So keep an eye on Adam Troutman as your starter going forward, but you're hoping to see a little bit from Kroll or from Dulcich, the opportunity to step up and maybe make things a little more interesting, or at least add some significant depth at the tight end position. When you're talking about the cornerback position, I've mentioned this prior to training camp as probably the most important competition, and one of the real ones, not the quarterback one. The cornerback one is a real competition. That one may be over even before it begins, because Levi Wallace, who the Broncos, former Buffalo Bill, played with Pittsburgh. Levi Wallace comes over as a free agent, has a lot of ability, has kind of had a career in which he's looked great at times and subpar at times, but thus far in camp, he has been consistent and he has been rather good. So when you're looking at the other mix of it, Wallace is clearly in the driver's seat. The person that was interesting coming into camp was Riley Moss. Riley Moss selected last year prior to the 2023 season and dealt with some injuries. Moss, obviously a very talented back out of Iowa, where they play an awful lot of zone. In fact, almost exclusively zone. If you remember Michael Ojemudia for the Denver Broncos, that was one of the challenges as well that Ojemudia wasn't able to at least overcome with the Broncos. But Riley Moss has the speed to be an impact player. He certainly has had the ability to show a little bit of ball hawking skills when he was in college. But at this point, while Moss has looked promising, and Sean Payton certainly had expectations for Riley Moss, mentioning him rather regularly in the OTAs and leading up to training camp, it is Wallace, the veteran, who has looked rather consistent. And quite frankly, were the Broncos to start a game today, they'd be very wise to start Wallace opposite of Surtain. Keep an eye on Moss. Obviously, Damari Mathis is still here as well. And keep an eye on the rookie Chris Abrams-Drain, also out of Iowa as well. Abrams-Drain considered more of a potential solution at the slot, of which they have Jaquan McMillan, who they feel good about as well. But that competition outside across from Surtain right now, Levi Wallace is so far in the lead, it's entirely possible that he's taken the job already. Unfortunately, while he is out for another week or so, Brandon Jones, the unrestricted free agent out of Miami that the Broncos brought in, has clearly locked down the starting free safety job, if you can even worry about who's free safety or strong safety anymore, even in absentia, because right now the Broncos are shallow. De'Aaron Turner-Yell is on the pup. Caden Stearns is back at practice, but Stearns and PJ Locke are really going more for the other side. Jael Skinner's in the mix, but really there is no real competition for Brandon Jones. As he is healthy, he is going to start, and he's going to be a major part of this defense, expected to be filling some very large shoes in Justin Simmons, who had held down that role for many years and has led the NFL in interceptions since the day he came into the league. But Brandon Jones does have talent, and he's definitely the guy. The Broncos are not going to rush him back with the hamstring injury that he has right now in training camp, because again, he's really the starter, and he's going to stay the starter. And they know what he can do as a veteran. They won't rush him back. Instead, they'll give more opportunities to Locke and Stearns and give them a chance to go ahead and solidify the other safety position, and the idea that you might be able to have a bit of a 3 safety rotation with the 3 guys, and make sure when other players need maybe a rest or something happens that you can step in. So that's another one of those positions that has essentially already been filled. The other one, maybe the most interesting one, we talked about it a bit, is the center position, sort of a 3-way battle presumed from veteran Sam Mustipher, who had played for the Ravens of late, who has started a handful of games at center, has also played a little bit at guard. Alex Forsyth, the former 7th-round pick out of Oregon. Forsyth overlapped with Bo Nix the prior season. And then Luke Wattenberg, 5th-round draft pick from a couple years back. It is Wattenberg who has really stood out. There's still been a rotation. And again, when you come out to camp and you look at who's going with the ones that day, that's valuable. But it doesn't mean that that person is really considered the starter by the Broncos. Again, when you look at one day at camp, it's one thing. When you're out here every day and you're starting to see some trends, that's really where it goes. They want to see everybody, by and large, with the ones, if they think there's even a chance they'll be a starter. So that's not uncommon. But when you start seeing it start to pile up, a little more time, a few more snaps here, the people they play with, the units they're working with, that matters. Forsyth was mentioned by Sean Payton earlier in the week as a guy that was also going to get a little bit of play at guard because they like his versatility. But that's the kind of thing you hear from someone who isn't going to be your starting center. So Forsyth, I think realistically, is probably out of the mix. It has become Wattenberg's job to lose. Mustipher, who has started, and of course the Broncos don't feel that he's necessarily the solution, but Mustipher can step in. So essentially the center position has boiled down to Forsyth is going to be a depth player. They do like him. He may very well end up making the roster as a depth player at center and guard. So Mustipher is there if Wattenberg can't hold the job. Mustipher also with some positional eligibility going to the other inside spots. But it is Wattenberg's role to lose. And the sooner the Broncos get that squared away, the better, because we're talking about a quarterback competition. We're talking about an offensive line that has 4 returning starters. On the offensive line, the main key, if you talk to any offensive lineman, is continuity. They want to be together as long as possible, get as many snaps together, because you think about the nature of the play. You have to know where the guy on either side of you is going to be without being able to look back for them. And that just takes a ton of time, a ton of reps, a ton of familiarity. So the sooner they get that cemented, the better. It looks like Wattenberg right out of the gate is taking, if not a stranglehold, something pretty close to it. And that's a good sign for the Broncos as well. As I mentioned, we had Ryan Harris on earlier this week who said that center position is obviously the easiest one to fill because you have guys on each side of you who can make sure that you've got all the calls right and all the protections correct. So if Wattenberg is up for that, he's likely to be your starting center too. The sooner the Broncos find that out, the better that will be for Bo Nix, knowing that you can maybe solve that long-term as well. So if you're coming to camp tomorrow, those are some of the position battles that might be coming to an end rather quickly, and you can pay attention to some of the other ones as well. But that will do it for us today at Broncos training camp or at Broncos Park. out at Dove Valley, sitting there at the end zone of one of the fields, and it's been a delight to get to talk to everybody today. Thanks so much to Cody Roark and Anilo Piro for being part of the show. Danny Bailey, you can't see him because he's over my right shoulder, but without Danny Bailey, none of this happens. In fact, you can't even see all the wires and the gizmos and gadgets that Danny's got cooking, but without any of it and all of it, we can't do this show. So thanks so much to Danny Bailey for making everything work, the best executive producer in the biz. I'm Shawn Drotar. We'll be back at it tomorrow, broadcasting live from Broncos Park at Common Spirit at 11 a.m. We'll see you at Broncos Camp tomorrow on a Thursday as the preseason comes ever closer right here on Mile High Sports.